Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. This is part two of my conversation with Dr. Dan. We're talking about how to heal from a destructive narcissistic parent, or we could say intimate relationship. In part one, we laid the groundwork. We talked about what we actually mean by, and I quote, destructive or controlling narcissistic partners or parents, the psychological distortions, the atmosphere of enmeshment, the ways that a child's internal world gets shaped around the parent. We explored the idea, and I quote, of victim posture and what regression looks like in adulthood, and the difficult but necessary shift from being organized around the narcissistic person in your life to being organized around oneself. And then we ended right at a very important point. I began bringing in a real live clinical example, a moment where you can actually see regression, the victim posture, and feelings of abandonment. So let me bring you right back into that moment. I hope you enjoy this final part of our conversation. I like to pivot, if it's okay with you, because I was just thinking of sort of a prototypical way that this may present in clinical practice. And again, I love to get your thoughts on this because I want to pull together a lot of things that we're saying, but do it by way of a clinical example so that people can relate to it a little bit differently. Because we're talking about the victim role. We're talking about regressing, right? We're talking about turning to oneself, although that was a little ambiguous, right? That got a little more complicated because it is for you and it is for the parent. But then in terms of treatment, if you could picture this scenario, a fellow, let's say, is very, very attached to his pet, his cat. Let's just say he has this loving cat. And we could say this is a narcissistically disturbed man. So this becomes like what we call a self-object. It's an extension of himself, something that stabilizes, soothes, comfort, never argues, always there for him. It's a good source of supply, this cat. But the cat passes away precipitously. Now, there's the loss, right? So this fellow doesn't have a rich life, but has a girlfriend who coincidentally that weekend that the cat passed away had already plans to go away with her friends on a trip. So this guy becomes enraged, right? That he wants her there. He's already completely destabilized because losing this self-object, and this could be, I'm just using an example of a cat, but Dr. Dan, you could fill in anything. But the point is it's an extension, a stabilizing force in your life, and now you're completely dysregulated. Then you have a second loss, your girlfriend's going away, and he gets angry. So he comes in this prototypical example and tells me, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to let her know that I was angry. And now I want to go into with you like specific, as close as we can get. And I'll share with you the way that I would work with something. And I'm curious to get your reaction. And sometimes it's nice to compare, different like clinical approaches, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is validate, because anytime someone's like in this dysregulated state, you have to get them into a more regulated state so they can begin to think. So I have to validate. And this goes back to where you and I started, that they really did. There really was a loss here. Again, the loss of the cat and now the girlfriend. But then I want to get closer to the anger, and begin to talk to him and see if we can open that up in terms of what did he get out of that? Why that approach, for instance? And what was it like? What did he accomplish or not accomplish? And see how far we could get him to reflect on the purpose of getting angry at this woman who he says abandoned him. That's what begins to emerge, is that she completely abandoned him. He's all alone. And of course, he's going to let her have it because she really left him at a time of need. So let me just pause there because I want you to jump in if you have any thoughts, but I could keep going with it.
Right. And the client will say, how dare she?
Mm-hmm.
How dare she do that to me? And I think you're right. You do want to validate someone's pain, because clients aren't going to, if their feelings can't be validated, they're not going to listen to much else you say. There's not enough good listening in the world to begin with. It's one of the roles that we can serve as therapists, but so they have to be heard. And that does open, I think, I agree with you. That opens the door for someone to look inward and be kind of curious about those intense emotions.
Yeah.
Aren't logical, but are meaningful.
Meaningful, yes.
Yes.
And that's what we want to do, is look at the meaning. So the anger, we're not condoning the anger. I just want to make that very clear, because sometimes listeners get very upset with me because I like to get closer to the anger And it doesn't mean that I condone it, but I understand the subjective useful component of it. And in this example, what we begin to discover, again, this is hypothetically, that no longer did he feel powerless, that he couldn't do anything about the loss of the cat or of his girlfriend, but now he felt strong and in control. And we can all imagine that's compensatory in nature and a much better feeling than being completely fragmented and falling apart, So now we're into the anger, and he can begin to see that, yeah, I use the anger, but you see, back to your point, Dr. Dan, from earlier, an important piece of healing you said was grieving, right? Mourning a loss, and it's of one identity. Like if one speaks up or plays a different role, in their family, for instance, with their father, back to the example we used earlier. But when this guy gets angry, what I begin to show him is he thwarted now the mourning process. See, there's no mourning anymore. Instead, now he's doing something else, which he's getting control of a situation to feel better. It's like an adrenaline rush. Like it's to feel good, to not have to experience any sort of depressive feelings or loss or neediness, right? Or dependency, which narcissists typically hate, by the way. So again, I want to pause because I'm curious to see, again, any reactions to that, or what are your thoughts on it?
I think it's a really good example because anger is a big emotion, and it does feel, even though it's difficult, it does feel powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you want to talk about that. You want to make meaning about it, as you said. And then I'm sure you do this in various ways as well, but to see what else might be there. Like I'll say to a client, is there either, if the anger wasn't there, what might you be feeling? Or in addition to the anger, is there anything else? And often underneath anger is real loss or grief or fear. My cat's gone, my girlfriend's gone, I'm all alone.
Mm-hmm.
I've never felt this. I don't know what to do.
Yes.
And if a person's willing to go there and look at that, they can then start to empower themselves because they know what's starting to drive maybe their ill-placed anger, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
or other feelings. And it's hard to do, though. It's a hard sell sometimes for any of us. When a therapist says, maybe there's some grief here. And people will say, a lot of people say, I don't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're not always taught very well how to grieve.
Yeah.
We're taught how to distract or how to
get angry.
Yeah.
And get angry. Here, let me just keep going play with where you are in this example with it. So then the goal, so we get closer to the anger, you said, right? And we could see what else is there. And perhaps there are some feelings. And this is what emerged naturally is she abandoned me. But the problem with that is subjectively, the feeling is one of abandonment. And I can appreciate that. Again, that's the validating piece. It's like we start over again. But I don't want this fellow to leave the room feeling like he's been abandoned, because in reality, she did not abandon him. She did leave, but leaving for a weekend is not an abandonment. And in fact, as I tease this out with him through way of gentle confrontations, because what I discover is they were in communication all week. And so in fact, he wasn't alone. I'm doing air quotes for those listening, right? Because he insisted that he was completely alone, right? Left, abandoned. But meanwhile, he's in contact with her. She's updating him. So she's trying her best to be there for him, knowing that she couldn't be there literally for him, which is what he needed. But that doesn't mean that's what she was capable of doing. So that's the next step, is to try to, in my mind at least, is to try to bring in some complexity, some nuance, so that it's not such a fixed way of thinking, which is very common with personality disorders. They get fixed on something, right? And then that must mean it's true, that she really did abandon me. And there's no other way to talk about this. It's just that she left me at a time of need, which of course is one level of it. It's true, but it's more complicated than that. And that's what I'm trying to do, is make this more complicated, if that makes sense.
Right. And if that view stands, she abandoned me in my hour of need, then I'm perfectly justified in having rage at her.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, where you point out, but you talk to her, she's still there. She's still your girlfriend. She's coming back. Where that black and white view can start to soften into the grays.
Mm-hmm.
And black and white viewpoints are characteristic of narcissists. There's these superlatives like, I'm the best. Everything I do is the best. I'm the greatest. I'm the this, I'm the that. And I have no flaws. And it's very black and white. It's very fixed and very rigid. And so if you grew up around that, that may be sort of what you're a little bit assume, that you learn how to view the world in black and white terms. But the world isn't black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time it's gray.
Yeah. And that's, I'll just say that a last word about it, because you reminded me of something else when you said if this is the way that they grew up, because that's what we end up talking about. Not going back to his childhood, because that's not always appropriate. That's sort of a caricature of how therapy works, but not with personality disorder patients. Sometimes that's an insult. They don't want to go back. They very much need to live in the experience. But what I end up talking to him about is how the girlfriend did not create this feeling of abandonment. In other words, she activated it. She triggered it. But we know, and this is one of the advantages, you probably do this work also, Dr. Dan, where you see patients, I would imagine, over a period of time. And that's one of the advantages of being with someone over time is that the abandonment feeling is already there because you've heard it in so many different iterations. And this is the process of what we call working through. This is working through another iteration of convinced that he's abandoned, but then he leaves with a very different perspective, which is she did not abandon me, that was already in there. And that's something I need to think about rather than just, again, reenact the situation where here I am. Oh, to your point from earlier, regressed in the passive role, right? Back to feeling like a child who's done something to me.
And these are difficult changes to make. And they, as you say, they do take time. And your example, I think, is like, it speaks to, for example, a very similar principle like in anger management, because people who go to anger management or have anger management problems always are saying, it's because of this, it's because of that. It's always something else. I'm mad because they did this or this didn't happen. And at some point, part of moving away from that is realizing, but wait, it's my anger.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you said, he was the one feeling abandoned.
Yes.
Wasn't the girlfriend activated it, but it's his anger.
Mm-hmm.
Or my grief. It's my feeling. No one put that in there.
Yeah.
And I have a choice about how I can express it.
Mm-hmm. I have a choice once, I would just add to that, once I feel like I could be in control of my emotions, which in part is doing what we're describing, is slowing all this stuff down and sort of breaking it into its component parts. Like what's really happening, not that it's really happening, but what's another way to look at what's happening here? Is there another way to look at it? So you mentioned something. Let me just see if I could pick up on this. You mentioned anger management, and I'm very curious. I don't know much about anger management courses, except for when I get these referrals, people come to me, and now I'm hearing this more and more since I'm specializing in treating narcissism, is they're sent to anger management by their wife. For instance, their spouse sends them there. And I ask them, what's your experience? And oftentimes what I hear is, one is a lot of people are mandated to go to these courses and don't really even want to be there. So it's hard to get like a good process going. But also the ultimate goal of anger management is to get control of your anger, right? Which may even mean sometimes suggestions are made to do the opposite. Like if you're upset with your wife and there's a fight, maybe you should send her a nice loving text message. Now, this stuff I find, and I'm curious to get your opinion on this, rarely ever works because it doesn't get them any closer to the things that you and I are discussing today, which is what's actually driving this anger. Is it a narcissistic slight? Is it that you're convinced that, again, you've been abandoned when there's really actually no abandonment there? Is it the lack of validation? Like there could be so many things. The fear of mourning and grieving and giving something up, dealing with separation, because anger drives people away, but could also bring people together, not in a healthy way, but in a very dysfunctional way. But that's the whole trauma bond. But I'm curious if you have any experience or impressions. Have you heard about these anger management courses? Or
I have, and I think part of the good anger management includes a couple of things in addition to what we're talking about, or maybe not. Actually, we've been talking about it in a little different way. But one is understanding the trigger, and the trigger isn't that someone cut you off in traffic. That's the trigger, but understanding what it represents. That deeper issue, because when people who have consistent anger problems begin to make meaning of what triggers them, not the incident, but what it represents. That person is getting in my way. That person thinks they're better than me. That person, something like that. There are probably only a handful of things that really trigger us. And they're repeating again and again and again and again and again in different forms. But if you can go to the source of, I feel disrespected, for example, just like I did when I was growing up. And I could never do anything about it. Now I can.
Yeah.
To the point that it's got me in a mandated anger management course. So part of it is that. And then the other part besides making meaning is you talk about getting control of the emotions. And I think it's also getting control of your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you do with that feeling? Because you can't make anger go away like that. But you can choose what to do about it. You can send a positive note to your partner rather than a flame email, or you can, the trite example of count to 10. But sometimes that helps you choose a different behavior that's not destructive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the theory anyway.
I like it, Dr. Dan. So what else? Did we cover it all, or was there anything that I missed, or anything that you want to speak to a little bit more before we begin to wrap it up?
No, I think it's such an important topic because, there's maybe, figures differ, but there's maybe 1 to 5% of adults, at least in our culture, in the United States, for example, have either a narcissistic personality disorder or maybe a narcissistic style. They might not qualify to be fully diagnosed, but they've got, so 1 in 20 people, perhaps at most. But those people have an outsized effect on their numbers. I mean, we remember the controlling, unethical, narcissistic boss or the bully far more than most other people, because that's what they do, is they have to dominate other people. They have to inflict things on other people. And so it's an important issue, even if you didn't have a narcissistic parent, because you run into people with narcissism just through life, and they can be very difficult. Communication to a narcissist it's not a win-win proposition. It's a win-lose proposition. I win, you lose.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not communication. And so you have to realize, I think, the limitations and the dangers of dealing with someone with narcissism, and also how to empower yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's a whole nother discussion I think you and I can have, which we need to think about, because today we focus more on the healing process, right? The victim role, the regression, the focusing on oneself. But what we didn't look at is, what if you choose to live a life with somebody? How do you relate to somebody who has these, maybe a full-on personality disorder, or at least these narcissistic traits? Because to your point, it can be very challenging. And depending again on the cluster type of narcissism, you'll feel it in different ways, but you will definitely feel it. And at some point, your own sense of self will begin to erode, because I mentioned this earlier, but there's typically only one person in the room, one person. It's all about gratifying their needs. But if you feel up to it, that could be part 2 of our discussion. Okay, Dr. Dan, is how does one live a life with somebody like this and preserve their own sense of identity, their own voice, their own autonomy? Mm-hmm.
And that's the key question, because that's the catch-22 of being with a narcissist is, if you hold on to yourself, you will lose the narcissist's approval and pleasure. If you try to appease them, you'll lose yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is, how do you hold on to yourself in the face of someone who is just playing a very different game in the world?
Yes. Yeah.
It's a good discussion.
All right. I'm looking forward to it. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to explore this topic. This topic was on controlling and destructive narcissistic parenting. And I really appreciate your approach to this. And I know my listeners are going to benefit. So thank you again, Dr. Dan, for being with us today.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here, Dr. M.
If this spoke to you and you're curious to learn more about all issues related to narcissism, please support the show by subscribing so you don't miss what's coming next. And even more importantly, take a moment to leave a review. Reviews make the podcast easier for others to find, which helps the show grow. The more the show grows, the more I can invest in creating thoughtful content that supports you in understanding and navigating your experiences with narcissism. Okay, thanks for being here with me. I'm grateful we got to explore this one together. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.